Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Turning on the Light of Truth teach-in. If you are here and you've seen our prior sessions, welcome back. We're glad that you're joining us again. And if you're new, take a look at our website where you can see recordings of sessions 1 through 3. I want to take this time to introduce myself. I'm Shauna Haynes, and this teach-in is the collaboration of a whole bunch of people. But I particularly want to acknowledge some people behind the scenes that you don't typically get to see. First, for technology, the reason that you can actually see us and hear us and got reminders via email is because of Grant Stancliffe and Krista Benson. And I want to thank for today, Krista Benson and Ari Weinberg are going to be doing the closed captioning. Amanda Burbage also closed captions some of our sessions. And today we have Lori Sampson, who is serving as the moderator for our presenters. So I wanted to make sure that the people who are keeping this going and keeping us on track also get kudos and shout outs. We couldn't do this without them. So now I'm going to turn this over to Lori Sampson so she can start this, our 4th session. Thank you, Lori.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Shauna. I'm Lori, and I will be your moderator today for today's teach-in series entitled Youth Communities. And we'd like to target racism and social injustices in places where youth find themselves, like schools, churches, sports, social media, social organization, and amongst their own peers. So that's going to be our target for today. We have the 3 lovely panelists, and I want to give you a brief introduction of each one, and then we'll get started straight away. So our first speaker today is going to be Charmaine. Charmaine has over 20 years of service and experience, rather, in computer information in the computer information field, and her specialty is in social media. She manages pages for profit and nonprofit organizations, and she is responsible for the marketing and developing of the Black Girls Unscripted brand across all social platforms. Following her will be Michelle. Michelle is a senior leader in the United States Department of Agriculture, and where she has served over 30 years of dedicated public service. And she has a daughter involved in Girl Scouts. Michelle has been the co-troop leader for her daughter's troop for 7 years. And Michelle is passionate about youth development. And she would like to speak a little bit on how children can advocate for civil rights. And then following Michelle will be Diana. Diana is the coordinator for the Dawson College Peace Center, where she collaborates with faculty on resource development curriculum. She supports student initiatives. A little bit, she's responsible for organizing professional developmental training and much, much more. I'll let her elaborate on that. So without further ado, we'll start with Charmaine.
Thanks, Lori. I'm happy to be here today to participate in this teach-in. As Lori said, I'm Charmaine Walker, or people call me Mayne. I've worked as a production manager for desktop publishing and graphic art, and for 20 plus years, and I'm also a social media strategist director. I love doing social media activism because I love seeing the kids out there that are doing this, from the younger kids up until the young adults. I love their fire and their passion. I love seeing them leading the movement for change, for anti-racism, for Black Lives Matter. I see you guys out there marching in the streets for equal rights. You're walking out of classrooms for climate change. You're standing up to people against gun violence. You're just rewriting the script that tells us how to think, behave, and treat one another. And I love working with you guys. What is social media activism? Media activism is a broad category of activism that utilizes media and communication technologies for social and political movements, such as FB, which is Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, and many other platforms that are out there. There are so many. It's often a tool for grassroots activists to spread information not available via mainstream media or to share censored news stories. So there are many protests going on at the moment, and we all can see it on the media. We read about it on Facebook. For social justice, civil rights, Black Lives Matter. It can be a whirlwind to your mind. You just don't know where to start. You're overwhelmed, and you're probably asking questions of how to be a social media activist. There are many options. You can protest in the streets. You can donate to organizations. You can go out and help protesters if you are willing to go out and protest during the pandemic. You can volunteer to assist protests with water and medical assistance and everything like that. Or you can be home if that's where you feel safe, because that's important. You need to feel safe. You can be home doing social media activism. This means you can email your congressman, your governor, your mayor, your police chief. You can do videos on TikTok about things that you see that you want to speak on. You can get the word out to your followers as to what's happening. You can do a Facebook Live as to how you feel about what's happening in the world. Facebook even has groups that you can join if you're into social media activism, and you can follow some people that are social media activists that are out there on a daily basis and posting on a daily basis, so you can get the information from there. You can post on Twitter and Instagram, and supporting Black businesses is of course a way that you can do social media activism, because you can post about Black businesses on your posts on your feed to get other people to go to them. You can post about large corporations and what they're doing for Black Lives Matter and social media activism. Next, I want to talk to you about being prepared and being able to back up the facts that you have. It's very important that when you're on social media and you want to use your platform, that everything is truthful to the best of your knowledge. Do your research. If you see something, go out to Google or to other platforms, do your research, see if there's other people that are talking about it, other platforms that are talking about it, compare what you read, and then you can do your posting. So be truthful, because everybody's not perfect. I'm going to say that. Everybody's not perfect. So if you do make a mistake, be willing to go back, because people are going to point it out. Be willing to go back and say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake in this posting. And in the future, I will try to be more factual. So just be careful where you're getting your information from. When you're doing this, make sure you're using hashtags that are very, very popular, because it gets your message out to more people. When you're doing your hashtags, let's say on Instagram, it'll give you a number of how many people are using that hashtag. And if it's 1 million people opposite 500 people, I would use the million, because you can get it out to more eyes. Let's see, what else I want to talk about. You can use like no justice, no peace, photo of the day, mood, world, inspiration, trending, news, protests. There are youth activist toolkits that you can also download. I'm talking to the kids and the parents, because I think the parents need to be involved in this too. There are toolkits that you can download to talk to with your kids about what they want to do on their social media posts as far as their activism is concerned. I'll talk about those, and you'll see those in the action items later. The last thing I want to talk about is care for yourself, okay? There are so many things that you are reading and consuming on social media, and you have to be mindful of your mind, your body, and your spirit. You need to take breaks. I myself, it's hard, and it's hard when you're a social media activist to take breaks. It's hard when you're working in social media to take breaks, but you need the proper sleep. You need some sort of, if you do meditation, do meditation. exercise, prayer, hobbies that take your mind off of what you are seeing on a daily basis, so you can get back in there and you can do the fight for social media, for anti-racism. While you're out there, you have to be careful about sea lioning, which is a term that I just learned about, whataboutisms, and also gaslighting. That's when people come to you with questions over and over and over again that they could actually look up on social media, and they want you to keep answering, and they want you to end up being either tired, or they want you to end up being angry with answering these questions, so they can point you out and say, she doesn't want to help, or he doesn't want to help, or they don't want to help. They just want to be up there talking on their platform. You have to recognize gaslighting and sea lining and whataboutisms to keep your platform going and moving forward and growing. And I think that you are ready for this journey. You are going to educate yourself. The older young people are going to get out there and vote. You're going to gather your friends together and fight anti-racism. And you're going to have the best social media platform ever. Thanks. And I'm going to turn this over to Michelle.
Thank you, Charmaine. So one way children can help dismantle systemic racism is through their participation in various youth organizations. Now, before I get too far into my discussion, I want to mention that I am not speaking as an official representative of the Girl Scouts of the United States of America. As Lori mentioned, I'm the mother of a Girl Scout and a volunteer co-leader of her troop of now 7th grade girls. I enrolled my daughter in Girl Scouts when she was a kindergartner because I wanted her to learn how important it is to help others who need support, as well as to develop leadership skills. I wasn't involved in Girl Scouts growing up, so I'm actually learning alongside my daughter through this journey. Girl Scouts has proven to help girls thrive in 5 ways as they develop a strong sense of self, seek challenges and learn from setbacks, display positive values, form and maintain healthy relationships, and identify and solve problems in the community. The Girl Scouts organization has been around for more than 100 years, and many women who were Girl Scouts have grown up to do impressive things. For example, 72% of the women in the US Senate and 58% of the women in the US House of Representatives were Girl Scouts. All 3 female secretaries of state, Madeleine Albright, Condoleezza Rice, and Hillary Clinton, are all Girl Scout alums. And virtually every female astronaut who has flown in space was a Girl Scout. Those are pretty impressive statistics, but they only represent a small number of those who have grown into civic and social-minded adults. From my observations, however, what's been missing in a lot of youth organizations, including Girl Scouts, is a specific focused commitment to dismantling systemic racism and to being an anti-racist organization. Many youth organizations have begun to promote diversity and inclusion policies related to LGBTQ+, which is fabulous, but many have not extended their policies to anti-racism yet. While some would like to say they prefer to have seen it sooner, and there's still a lot of work to be done, I was happy to see the Girl Scouts take a public stance against racism and develop a pledge to work for a just society for all. They recently committed to making a financial investment to partner with experts in the area of race, inclusion, and equity with a focus on girls and women. Specifically, they are forming a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force at the national board level to help create an organization that works for all girls. Also, they will create a racial justice steering committee made up of national staff and Girl Scout Council CEOs to help guide and prioritize the work of the Girl Scouts. Girl Scouts is strengthening their hiring practices to help reflect the communities the Girl Scouts they serve. They also will support and train all staff in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Girl Scouts is providing additional resources, training, and support to the 700,000 plus volunteers like me to ensure we are equipped to serve all Girl Scouts equitably. And they're committed to providing a place where all girls feel heard and where they have the resources and support they need to raise their voices and change their corner of the world to ensure all girls' voices are heard. Finally, the Girl Scouts organization has requested all girls, volunteers, alums, supporters, families, staff, and suppliers and service providers to sign a pledge committing to taking action to make the world a more equitable place. So what does this all mean for Girl Scouts and what programming will they receive? Well, several years ago, Girl Scouts launched the GIRL, and that's an acronym standing for Go-Getter, Innovator, Risk Taker, and Leader, initiative to inspire, prepare, and mobilize girls and those who care about them to lead positive change through civic action. Encouraging girls to speak up and advocate for the issues and ideas important to them is not new in Girl Scouts. Girl Scouts have always existed to do more than camping and arts and crafts, though that might be what most people think they do. And there are valuable, certainly there's value in those things too. But even before women could vote in the United States, Girl Scouts could earn the citizen badge by displaying their knowledge of government and how to get involved. Today, all levels of Girl Scouts, from 5-year-old daisies to 18-year-old ambassadors, can take part in earning citizen badges that allow them to engage in age-appropriate activities involving community service, public policy, government, voting, and more. Over time, the badges build the girls' knowledge of local and global communities and show them how their actions as citizens make the world better for everyone. In addition to badges, Girl Scouts participate in journeys, which are extended engagements with a topic that culminates into a take action project to make the world a better place. Journeys are created specifically for leadership development. The highest awards in Girl Scouts are the Bronze, Silver, and Gold Awards, and Girl Scouts who receive those go above and beyond to make a difference in their communities and the greater world. Earning these awards takes a lot of hours of work, and they result in a sustainable take action project that will continue to help or serve the community after the Girl Scout establishes it. For many years, Girl Scouts have been adding new programming related to science, technology, engineering, and math, as well as outdoors, life skills, and entrepreneurship. I'm excited to see what policies the Girl Scouts Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force will implement and how their Racial Justice Steering Committee will help guide and prioritize the work of the Girl Scouts organization in the future. As a Girl Scouts volunteer, I know I have a responsibility to ensure our girls are treated equitably and to help them through programming such as citizen badges and take action projects, figure out ways to promote anti-racism and equity for all. This could include a number of things such as advocating for school committees that advance anti-racism efforts at the local level, as well as ensuring their schools have books in their libraries that represent everyone's history. I encourage all of you to consider researching organizations that interest you and determine if they support and promote anti-racism and equity. If you are involved in an organization already that isn't actively promoting these things, ask them how they might and provide them with suggestions on how they can. I think it's also to help adults, in addition to children, learn and take action for promoting anti-racism. I'll be sharing several of my ideas about these later in the session. And now I'm turning things back to Lori for a commercial break.
Thank you, Michelle. I just want to remind you at this time of next week's talk or teach-in. Shauna Haynes and James Pataglione Jr. will be talking about righting wrongs, a call to action and going forward. Some of the things they're going to talk about is the impact of social justice protests on civil rights in this country, and to correct common misconceptions about protests. So it should be very interesting. That will be next Wednesday at 1 o'clock. And also wanted to remind you that this session is being recorded. So a link will be provided later for you guys to share with other people or to review again if you're interested. So now we're going to go to Diana, who's going to talk to us at this point.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Diana Rice, and I am coming to you from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. So for anyone who doesn't know where that is, think New York City and then drive more or less 7 hours north of there. So I'd quickly like to take a moment to do a little acknowledgement. So currently I'm in my kitchen right now at home, but I am also sitting in unceded Kanien'kehá:ka territory, which is Mohawk territory in Canada. And I'd like to acknowledge the fact that this land is settled, occupied land by white European settlers. And that is really important and necessary for us to sort of like know and understand where we are in our location, right? And so for me, I am in unceded Kanien'kehá:ka territory right now. So I'm going to talk to you about education. I work at Dawson College, which is in, again, Montreal, or in Kanien'kehá:ka, and my role is to be the programming coordinator for the Dawson College Peace Center. So quickly, the Dawson College Peace Center came about because in 2006, we had a school shooting. And in the aftermath of the school shooting, one of the things that was really important to the college was to not militarize our school. So we did not add security guards. We did not add armed security guards. We did not add metal detectors. We did not add increased policies or procedures for surveilling or detaining students. Instead, what the college did was a series of proactive, positive movements that tried to rebuild the community. And one of those outcomes was the Dawson College Peace Center, which the idea would be to help provide students and faculty and staff and administrators ways to get directly involved within our community in peaceful ways. I've been lucky enough that I've been doing this now for 4 years as the programming coordinator. And I do a lot of different things, including professional development, initiative with student projects, working with faculty on curricula. And then recently, before I left for maternity leave, we were working on creating a group of invested faculty, staff, and administrators who were pushing for equity. Equity policies and procedures and practices throughout the college, and using equity, which would include anti-racism, as a lens through which we could change hiring practices, potentially admissions, training, and all these kinds of things. So, education. Education is a really, really important part of youth communities, right? I mean, for the vast majority of students, and I know I'm speaking from Canada, but in the United States and in Canada, youth go to school at the very least for about a decade of their lives, at the bare minimum, right? Even if they don't fully complete high school and they drop out before they graduate, you are spending at least a decade of your life in this institution, right? And then for anyone who continues on afterwards, it could be another decade or more of your life, depending on how far your education goes or how far you decide to take your education. So why is it really important for educational institutions to tackle anti-racism, right? And why is it important for youth to be a part of it? Well, it's obvious in some ways, right? So education is the place where we educate our future leaders, right? And our future decision makers. So what they're learning, right, and who has access to that knowledge will determine what our decision makers are and who they are and the kinds of decisions that they make later on when it comes to broad range policy. It also provides the research and the data for government policies. So whether you know or not, a lot of government policy ends up getting backed up by research that comes out of educational institutions, particularly obviously at university and college level, right? So who is creating the research and who has access to that research and who are the voices within research makes a really big difference on policy, right? For everybody, for all communities. It also selects and establishes who has knowledge and who has access to knowledge. And furthermore, it defines what knowledge is valuable. And that is really important. How we define knowledge and what knowledge gets considered to be of value very much gives us an indication of what the social priorities are. And it also can teach us and help us understand the context within we are operating, right? So if not everybody has the same basis of facts that they're dealing with, the same histories, the same understandings of the people within your own country, and it becomes extremely challenging to be able to have discussions about anti-racism, about anti-Blackness, about the Black Lives Matter movement, and all of these kinds of things, because if you're not operating from a place in a space where everyone is coming armed with the same knowledge and they haven't had access to that knowledge, then you're automatically going to have problems. You're automatically going to have conflicts, right? And it's also, and then schools, again, from the K to 12 or for the post-secondary, so college, university, also is a significant aspect of socialization, right? So because you spend so much time in school, it becomes another place and space where you are informed about not only your own identity, but the identity of your peers, social priorities, what we value. And that is really important. So we have, Mayne was talking about, social media. That's a huge part of our socialization. Girl Scouts and like organizations, a big part of the socialization of society, and education as well is a massive one, in particular because the K to 12 is mandated by government, right? The government really has their hands in that, state governments, obviously. So that's a really, really key factor. So what do we know about racism within schools, right? So we know that BIPOC students, and when I say BIPOC, that's Black, Indigenous, and persons of color. And the reason I'm using BIPOC is because in Canada, our big conversations are not just about anti-Black racism, but also about anti-Indigenous racism. And so it's a really, really useful term for our context. So BIPOC students are disproportionately disciplined, right, for major and minor offenses as compared to white youth in the K to 12 area. So in fact, BIPOC students are 4 times more likely to be suspended. They are 3 times more likely to be removed from a classroom for misbehavior. And they're 3 times more likely to be expelled than white counterparts, or at least white presenting counterparts. So for BIPOC students are also more likely to have encounters at the school with security agents. So whether that's a security guard or whether it is actual police, depending on the way that your schools are set up, right? Students of color or Black students and Indigenous students are 3 times more likely to have the police called on them. And they're 3.5 times more likely to get arrested. Now, these stats are American stats. If there happens to be a random Canadian who's listening in, our stats are very similar. They're shockingly they're exactly the same, or more or less the same for our Black and Indigenous youth, and as well as for students of color as well, or non-white presenting students. BIPOC children are also less likely to have access to resources, right? What they are often attending disproportionately schools that are critically underfunded, and teachers are less likely to provide support to them in terms of attention and tutoring. They're also less likely to have their questions answered in class or be called upon, right? Which goes to a really important sort of confidence building, right? So if you are not called upon when you know the answer and you're ignored consistently, this becomes, again, sort of like one of these small everyday microaggressions that's intensely problematic. BIPOC children are more likely to be streamed out of pre-university education and more likely into trades and less challenging curricula, which is not a great way of putting that, but yes, less than that pre-university education. They're also less encouraged to go towards careers in STEM, so science, engineering, and mathematics. And they're also less encouraged to go to apply for post-secondary education, right? So they're also less likely to get letters of support from school counselors and teachers when applying for university education as well. So with all of that, what is to be done about this? Well, there's actually a lot that can be done when it comes to this topic matter. And it can be done from both a student perspective and from a parent perspective as well. And when I say student, I mean anyone from someone in K-12 or in the college university system. One of the most important things that people speak to or think about frequently is about curriculum. Now, curriculum is really important, right? Changing the curriculum can make a difference, because excluding or erasing particular people's histories is obviously incredibly problematic. And it is one of the reasons why we end up where we are today. It's one of the reasons why we have people marching in the streets for Black Lives Matter. It's one of the reasons why we have climate change movements. It's one of the reasons why we have all of these protests and demonstrations and people buying in to this kind of thing, is because we don't have a curricula that reflects who we are right now and reflects who we were in the past, right? North America never was white. North America has always been occupied space that was indigenous land, stolen, right? And then populated by stolen, kidnapped, enslaved Africans, who then were forced to provide labor for whites and to create a secondary or a newer economy, right? And so the very fact that we don't teach any of these kinds of things makes it really challenging. And so therefore we need to, it's really important that our curriculum changes as well. And not just in history, but also, when you're reading in your English classes, right? You shouldn't only be reading canonical sort of white, male, European, cisgendered, heteronormative texts. There is a litany of amazing, wonderful authors who have done tons of things, who come from all different kinds of backgrounds, and that should be included in our curriculum. So curriculum is really, really important, right? But it's not just curriculum. The other big piece is the administration of schools. And again, whether you're talking about K-12 or you're talking about the university level, hiring. Who stands in front of the classroom? Who's the principal? Who is the counselors? Who is the provost of the university? Who are the major managers within your university and your college who make decisions? So who stands in front of students, again, irrespective of their role, whether they're staff, management, administration, or faculty, that it's important because, one, that means that you have somebody potentially who understands your life experience, right? If they are coming from the same community as you. Secondly, what's important is that students need, young folk need the ability to see themselves, right? See themselves in these positions. If you spend an entire lifetime of only seeing white teachers and white principals and white counselors and and all these different roles, which is really common because the vast preponderance of education, particularly when it comes to administration and staff and faculty, are white, right? That has a detrimental effect because you can't see yourself in those roles. That all of a sudden that becomes not your sphere. You are not welcome there. You don't see a place for yourself there, right? So hiring matters. Funding, again, K-12 and also for university, right? So currently, I know in the United States, funding is often tied to the tax bracket, right? Or the taxable property taxes and the income levels, right? Within your neighborhoods. Functions a little bit differently in Canada, but we still have schools that are underfunded as compared to other ones. So it's not like it's all equitable in Canada either. We have serious issues when it comes to fair funding for primary and secondary schools based on where you live, essentially. And the same thing goes for universities. Now, when it comes to universities and colleges, we often see funding in the like for academic scholarships, right? But academic scholarships, are only awarded, typically speaking, to the exceptional, which is intensely problematic. So the kids who prove themselves to be exceptional and deserve financial aid, right? There's not enough different ways of getting financial aid to students. And financial aid does not often include food, room and board, books, and all of the other things, healthcare, mental health, all of the other things that you need to support yourself going through school, particularly if you're going through the college or university experience. These are all things that are fundamental to your experience as a student, right? Training for all of these people, right? So for anybody who works, you should have ongoing scheduling training. Admissions, who gets in? If you have the same type of cohort that comes in year after year, that's a problem, right? And then when your admissions are based on standardized testing and grades alone, that means that you are probably going to continuously replicate the same kinds of student populations over and over again because of the K-12 inequities when it comes to access to college prep, right, for SATs. When it comes to responsibilities at home, there are most inequities are often coming with like financial, when it comes to financial and responsibilities at home. And very frequently in middle class or upper middle class, wealthier white neighborhoods, children often have less responsibilities, period, than children who are coming from less economically advantaged schools, which means very often they have more time to put into schoolwork. Not only their parents have time to be able to offer them tutoring and other resources, which again, you don't see necessarily in these other neighborhoods that are like less economically advantaged. Safe spaces. Safe spaces are critical. Having spaces for students who are from marginalized populations where they can exist and not have to worry about aggression from other people, where they don't have to explain who they are and validate their existence, right? So one thing that we have is becoming more common in Canada now is the idea of having a Indigenous resource centers for Indigenous students, where they can go and just be apart from the rest of the student population, which is usually largely white, and it provides space and place for them to hold so that they don't have to worry about the nonsense, basically the racist garbage and nonsense that they very frequently have to endure. And the same thing goes for other minority populations or ethnically minority populations or gender minority populations or other groups. School boards, local and state, or in Canada, provincial officials, who is there makes a difference. Who is in your local councils? Who are in your school boards? Who are the people and who are the groups who make decisions for K-12 particularly? That matters, right? So if you're gonna have inequitable policies and problems when you don't have good representation, right? And lastly, it's really important to work with local groups that are already engaging in policy, because often in your area, in your county, in sort of in the broader context in which you are operating, very frequently there are local civic groups that are trying to push for change that is more systemic. And so you don't always need to necessarily reinvent the wheel. You can go and search out and find those people who are already working on that and then work with them to push what is of value to you and your particular school. Let's say if you have particular issues that you need to work out and you think really need addressing. And I guess the last thing I'll say actually is food security comes on that too. Food security is incredibly important, and schools often fill that niche of food security. And that also is not just a K-12 situation, colleges as well, colleges and universities. It's really important to be able to have student unions and the college funding food security for students, because not all students have parents who can afford to put them through college and university. They're frequently on grants, loans, and all kinds of different situations, which doesn't always mean that you have enough money to feed yourself properly. And that's incredibly important. And again, disproportionately speaking, BIPOC students, so Black, Indigenous, and students of color are often the ones who are the least food secure. And we're gonna get, I think, into sort of like how you can push on these things. So I think I will maybe stop talking because I think I've also occupied much more time than everybody else. And I will kick it back.
I'm monitoring it.
I'll kick it back to Lori.
You guys see, we have a question from a 4th grader. Can you guys read that question or no? Or I'll go ahead and read it. It says, they don't tell you about this racism and injustice in this world, nor how to take action there. Fourth graders are old enough to know. Why don't they tell you? Also, what started racism in the world? She's very interested in what in the world, all the senseless and violent things in this world happened, and also how did they get so popular? So,
Okay.
would like to touch upon that briefly?
Okay, well, I'll talk about, let's say briefly how to take action as a fourth grader, right? Okay, so how you can take action as a fourth grader is with your parents. You can sit down and create a list of things that you want to see change. So if in your fourth grade class, your civics class or your history class or your English class isn't representative of the diversity of American voices, right? So whether, Black authors and Indigenous authors and South Asian authors and that kind of thing, or the history, then you can, with your parents, demand your teacher change their curriculum in ways that the state can allow them. So, right, have added additional and supplemental materials, right? So that you can broaden, have projects that are sort of looser so that you can choose what you want to focus yourself on. You can also have your parents get involved on the school board or get involved in the PTA if they have that kind of time, or at very least lobby for different kinds of hiring practices as well, which is, I mean, as a fourth grader, you may not be able to do that yourself, but with your parents, you might be able to sit down and with other parents, be able to talk about how do we hire different kinds of people so that you have the benefit and the experience of different voices. I don't know if we have enough time to tackle on where does racism come on, where it come from.
Thank you, Diana. Diana, you actually have a question directed directly to you. I'm not sure if you can see it. It's how do you can?
Yes. Okay. So how does
address that briefly as well?
How about the turnover problem in holding school administrations accountable, and that inherent to the environment is that students will graduate and leave and have difficulty holding the administration accountable. Incentivizing them is just waiting students out. Okay. So yeah, so obviously one of the things that's challenging about schools is you have turnover populations, right? I mean, so students, you have constant cohort population turnovers, right? And that is challenging. What is critical is having policy and procedure. Now, that doesn't sound exciting, but policies and procedures are how you do this. So for example, if you have in your school, your teachers and staff have not a student code of conduct, but a code of conduct by which they have to acquit themselves, right? Ensuring the code of conduct that employees have to abide by is anti-racist in nature and has built-in accountability is one of the ways in which you can ensure administrative accountability over time, right? So it's not just about ensuring that you're, you have individual Band-Aid solutions. What you really need to do is you have to look particularly at the policies, like hiring policies, funding policies, like all of that stuff. There are policies, there's actually written documents that say, you have to do this, you have to do that. So if you want to change it and continuously hold accountability without worrying about student turnover, you need to have those policies and procedures changed and ensuring that they are equitable and they're anti-racist and that you have the right people writing them, that they're not just the same people who have been not accountable all this time writing them, but actually bringing in experts to ensure that these policies are made in such a way that there is accountability and it can last.
Great, thank you, Diana. We don't have any other questions at the moment, but our panelists have developed some very helpful proactive resources that promote anti-racism, and they're done on slides. Do we want to go ahead and?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen with everyone.
And then we can talk about some takeaways from each.
Okay, can everybody see that?
I cannot.
You cannot. Oh, hold on. Can you see it now?
It's coming. There it is.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so for me, since I'm going first, I'm going to direct this especially at our fourth grader. You can follow change activists on social media. Oh, I know you probably don't have a phone to do that right now, but you can have your parents get online and follow some change activists for social media that can help you learn about what's happening to people of color and BIPOC people in the world. When you get older, you can join your school council and speak up for anti-racism and what's on your curriculum and what's taught in your schools, as Diana was saying before. Ask about your school's social media platform. What are they posting on there about people of color and what's happening in the world? Ask if when you get older, or for those out there that are at the age where they can get on student council, ask if you can be part of what's being posted out there on social media so you can get the word out. There are several links here that will be emailed to you after the session's over. This slideshow will be emailed out to you so you can get these links about young people, activists that are your age, that can you can follow on social media. Also follow Black Girls Unscripted, which I am the social media director of on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Right here are some racial gaslighting, which I talked about before. Some of these things are what people will say to you to gaslight you and to think that what you're talking about isn't worth talking about. But keep pushing because it's worth talking about. Anti-racism is definitely worth talking about. Here is digital action interrogation for yourself. What you would need to do to make sure everything is truthful that you're putting out there. So this is a good graphic that you can use to make sure everything is truthful and how it impacts everything that you put out there. And now the next slide is for Michelle.
Thank you, Charmaine. So I have some fairly basic suggestions for folks, and some that might be a little bit more involved, but you know, as I've been researching things and trying to figure out how I can be more helpful with anti-racism, these are some things that, you know, I've discovered. And the basic, I mean, we go down to basic, don't laugh at racist jokes. Especially if you're in a group of friends and one of your friends, Maya, this might be something that you could experience at some point as a fourth grader, maybe when you're a little bit older. But, you know, if people do make jokes at the expense of someone else's race in your presence, call them out on it. Sometimes that might be ignorant to it, but others it might be totally intentional. But hold them accountable and say, hey, you know, this is how it makes people feel when you say things like that. And, you know, that could help, and it certainly would make those who are being joked about feel a little bit better, I think, to have a friend to come to their, you know, defense and not just let it go. A big important thing, I think, for many of us is to educate ourselves on the Black history we didn't learn in school, on white privilege, and on systemic racism. And there are a lot of resources available to do that with books, documentaries, podcasts, and I think we might be putting up some of this stuff on the Light of Truth website at some point. But it's important to educate yourself so that you can help to educate others. There's a lot of lack of education on these topics and understanding, and I think that's part of the reason why we see some of the problems today, because people don't get it and need to take more effort to learn about why we're seeing the things we're seeing going on right now, if you don't know already. Some of these things Diana, I think, already touched on is participating in school activities and clubs, and that extends to Girl Scouts or scouting, other organizations that promote anti-racism. And if they don't exist at your school, maybe you could consider leading them, developing them, bringing people along with you. You could also join or follow organizations that have anti-racism agendas that you also can help promote. I will say that I'm following as Mayne has discussed, I follow a lot of things that the NAACP of Fairfax County, where I live, are doing, and their priorities that they're addressing with our superintendent, our Fairfax County Schools superintendent next week, that gets at the hiring and who you see in the classrooms and in the schools, the materials that kids are learning in schools, and a whole host of other things that we've talked about today. But you know, I'm tracking that and I'm following that, and I'm going to help support that agenda as a Fairfax County resident. So follow those kinds of things. If you have access to social media yourself, I will say Charmaine, my 6th grader, has a phone. Well, she's almost a 7th grader. Kids have phones and access to social media a lot earlier than we realize. But there's a lot of things you can do in following folks on social media and learning what's going on, joining rallies when it's safe to do so, and signing. One thing I mentioned in here is signing pledges and other things to get things on the agenda of your local elected officials or school boards. A lot of times kids can do that too, but if they don't allow children to sign on these things, get your parents to do it, or talk to your friends and family about it and encourage them to do it also. Certainly, we want to encourage people to vote, whether you're voting it for your school council or you're voting in some of the elections where you have to be at least 18, and encourage other people to vote too. That's really, really important. And another thing, use your purchasing power to support companies that promote anti-racism. Look at what elected officials are receiving, what organizations certain elected officials are receiving contributions from, and decide if that works for you. And maybe you want to, instead of buying something from one company, you buy your item from another company who maybe does contribute towards elected officials that have more of your values. So these are just a few things. I think we'll probably include some specific books and documentaries and such to recommend on the website. So that's it for me, and I'll turn it over to Diana.
Okay, so I mean, I sort of like broadly about a lot of this stuff, right? But so I guess I'll look at the student stuff, right? So there's a faculty administration on one side of the graphic you can see, and if anyone has any specific questions about that, I could answer that in the Q&A. But so for students, if you have a student union or a student council, get involved, because student unions and student councils do have power to a certain extent, right? They can be there to help protect students, right? And they can be there to help back up student action. So if you want some kind of a power or someone to be able to back you up, student unions and student councils are really critical, really important. If you're in a university, this is more university and college, but it can apply to K-12 as well. Within the university and colleges, find out what the student union hiring practices and payment policies are, and see if they're based on equitable practices. And if they're not, to lobby for change, ensuring that your student union is also held to account in the way you would expect faculty and management and administration and staff to be held to account on these items, right? Find out what the yearly budgets are for your student unions. Whether you know it or not, student unions often have fairly healthy budgets because part of your tuition are student fees, right? And so you can demand, and you can find out, because it has to be transparent most of the time. They have to be able to publish their budgets, and they're audited yearly as well. So finding out where they spend their money. Are they spending their money on parties? Or are they spending their money on funding local businesses that are, possibly questionable when it comes to their ethics and their values, those kinds of things. But then you can also, demand that they spend their money on food security, on healthcare, on crisis centers, on sexual health, on support centers for trans youth, for clubs, So a lot of, when it comes to student clubs and sort of smaller organizations within the university, often they get their funding from the student union. And so therefore ensuring that there is equitable funding for student clubs that is broad, so that you can have those safe spaces, ensuring that there are physical spaces on campus that are managed by the student union and not the university or the college, for safe spaces is really, really important as well. Finding out if your department, if you're at a college or university, if the department that you mainly interact with, so if you're a history major or an engineer or whatever the case may be, finding out if they have a community council or a student council, which they often do. And that is a place where you can use to directly lobby that department for change. So whether it's hiring practices, departmental policy when it comes to all matter of things, and making sure that they reflect equity, ensuring that your graduate school admissions is also is based on an equitable process and isn't not just looking at grades. Sometimes the focus often for departments when it comes to graduate admissions is not only grades, but it's also what scholarship are you coming in with, or what funding are you coming in with. And again, depending on where you're coming from, you may or may not be able to get a lot of funding, or you may not know how to apply for funding, right? And so ensuring that there are spaces in admissions available for students who don't necessarily have those kinds of things, but may have great life experience, may have an incredible thesis that would add to a specific field. So ensuring that graduate admission practices are equitable. Lobbying for curriculum change. Again, ensuring that you're not looking at Western-only pedagogy, Western-only sources, and privileging of white, heterosexual, cisgender, heteronormative male voices. And then also the last thing you can do as a student that I think is really important is searching out, ally and accomplice networks to provide support to yourself and others. Now, this isn't necessarily just looking at, like finding white allies or, allies who aren't part of your group, but finding the faculty members, finding the staff members, finding the people who are coming from your community, as well as students who come from the same community as you, to be able to create support networks. Anybody who is a Black student or an Indigenous student who's going through college or university, and particularly once you get into the graduate levels, will tell you how challenging it is when you find yourself being like the one Black student or one of two Black students in your program. Graduate school is intense under the best of circumstances. It is incredibly important to have supportive networks in that. And I will leave it there because I think we have like 3 minutes left before.
Yes, thank you. Thank you guys so much. I want to remind everybody that next week's talk will be about righting wrongs, a call to action and going forward. Shauna Haynes will be speaking along with James Pataglione. And also I wanted to remind you that you will get a link to this today's series, along with all of the other links that were provided you guys in the slides, so that you can refer back to them. Shauna, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I do. I want to thank everybody for attending today. I want to thank our panelists. I think he provided a really interesting and needed perspective. So often the youth communities are neglected or not addressed or talked about in these social movements. And we know that in these social movements that young people are often the driving force behind change. So I thank you for addressing them and for, taking their concerns seriously. Our 4th grader, Maya, right, who wants to make change, to address her with the intent and, respect that we tend to give adults, I think is really important, that we recognize their time and their efforts. So I thank you. Again, like Lori said, I'm speaking next week. I'm talking about protest, how they're effective. I'm going to be addressing some of the myths surrounding protest and the misconceptions. And then there's a pivot where James is going to talk about healing and moving forward and spiritual practices in a way that are not often addressed. He's going to talk about statues being torn down as ancestral reckonings. He's going to talk about the root work that he's seen. So he's going to come from a perspective and a position that most of us have not discussed or talked about in protests and in social movements, and I think it'll be interesting for everyone. The last thing I want to say is to thank our social media, Lisa Reynolds and Karen Bloom, who've put together the graphics and a lot of the bios and pictures that you've seen. I'd like to thank them for that as well. So thanks again for attending. Thank you, presenters, and we will see you next week.